Hello YouTube, it's Accurate again, back with another video from the home studio. Today let's talk about the newly announced rhythm performer TR-6S from Roland.
Accurate beats.
Alright, so at first glance the TR-6S is just a small, nice little drum machine with 6 different tracks, 6 different samples and a sequencer. But similar to how the MC101 is this really competent but smaller, lighter version of the MC707, this is the smaller, lighter version of the TR-8S, the fully fledged drum machine that Roland put out a few years ago that a lot of people really enjoy. So let's not be fooled by the size of this one. The TR-6S is actually way more competent than I first expected myself. Now let's get it connected into the setup and see what it's all about. Okay, so here we are all set up with the TR-6S hooked up to my setup, so we have some audio for this video. Right now I'm running it off the USB power because the batteries that came with it kind of died on me when I was getting to know the entire unit in itself. So looking at the back of the unit, first of all, we do have the power input here, which is over USB-B. We also have an SD card slot, a MIDI in and out, and a normal output left and right audio jack. There's also this separate phones output in the front, but right now I'm just using the normal output. We have 6 different tracks right here, named bass drum, snare drum, low tom, hand clap, closed hi-hat and open hi-hat, and we also have this normal 16-step sequencer down at the bottom of it. So far it kind of looks and seems like a drum machine, right? But the fact is that you can actually use these 6 different tracks for anything that you want. You can load up different sounds from the presets, and you can also load up your own samples, normal WAV files that you put on the SD card and import into the TR-6S. Right now I actually have a pre-made kit loaded up here, so it's drum sounds for now. I can change my kits by going here. So when it comes to the sounds that this one comes preloaded with, sure, you have the normal 808s and 909s and 606 and that sort of stuff that you kind of expect from Roland, but some of the different kits also has stuff like that loaded up into it. The different kits can also, of course, be modified, and you can swap out any sound that you want in the kit itself. So let's replace this snare drum, for instance. So maybe you want to use another snare. Or maybe something completely different, like one of the chords that's built into it. So basically you're by no means limited to just use drums in this one. Since you can also load in samples from an SD card, you can do a lot of really cool creative stuff with this one. Let's actually go back in here and replace this sound with one of my imported samples. It should be that one. Sure. So I basically just recorded this little one-shot thing inside of Logic. I exported it, imported it in here, and now it works like all of the other one-shots in the unit. Now the sequencer in this one is completely step-based in the same degree as the one found on the TR-8S. You're not able to record anything unquantized on this, not for the note triggers and not for the different automation lanes either. It's completely step-based, which is kind of unfortunate, but not the end of the world. You do have a shuffle or a swing setting here that goes from -128 to +127, so you can definitely get some swing into the sequencer. And you also have this nice and simple way to create subdivision steps between the different 16 steps in the sequencer. We can do double time triggers, triple time, or 4 times. We can also do flams. So yeah. That functionality, together with the swing or shuffle setting in the unit itself, actually gives this unit more life than you might expect at first. It can't do anything unquantized, but it can do some other fun stuff like that. And when it comes to the presets in this one, let's actually have a listen to some of it. We have kick drums, snare drums, rim shots, hi-hats, cymbals, percussions, effects and hits, vocal samples, synth sounds, basses, scaled instruments, and finally chords. So what's cool about that I know that a lot of TR-8 users really swears by, is that you are able to load up these samples into the different tracks and then automate and sequence the different parameters of it. So let's take this one for instance. That's a chord. Now let's go into the step sequencer and delete everything. Then I can put my triggers in here. Now what I could do here is actually to change some of the parameters per individual step on the sequencer. So I'm going to hold this one, go into my tune setting and pitch this one down 20. And like that, I've created this progression. So that's kind of cool, and a lot of people use that for triggering one-shots and creating sequences like this. But it becomes a little bit difficult and hard when you're trying to create these, like, you know, bigger chord progressions or intricate melodies with a bunch of different notes left and right. It gets a bit confusing, but it's cool that the functionality is in here. Now let's make another example here and actually load up one of the open hi-hats in the unit. Sure, an open 909 hi-hat, that works. Now let's create a sequence here with just some straight 8 notes in the sequence. And let's turn down the decay. Cool. So now this open hi-hat sound has kind of become a closed hi-hat instead, and I'm able to do stuff like this, either in real time or sequence it on the step sequencer, and that's what I want to do for this. So say that I want this one to be longer, then I can just hold this one, go into the decay setting and turn it way up and back down for this. And like that, we have actually created a pattern with a closed and open hi-hat on one single track like this. I know it's not rocket science or anything, but I just think it's fun to come up with ideas like that to get around some of the limitations in a device like this. Now let's go into the sequence and actually change some more stuff. Here I want to take down my velocity for at least every other step. And let's also add a few more notes in here, and let's increase our shuffle. So let's take down the velocity of these ones. And just because I can, let's also put a few different sub-steps in here. Maybe there and there. And let's of course turn down the velocity of these ones as well, because they're a little bit too much. Okay, let's also modify the pitch value of the sample, and let's do that in real time, like kind of fun. The 6 different tracks here also has way more parameters connected to them than what you can change over time in the sequencer, like you can do with the tuning, the decay, and the velocity. So let's edit one of the instruments, and we get access to changing the tuning, the decay, the level, the gain, the panning, and the reverb and the delay send. That's also really handy to have right here. We can also assign an LFO to a bunch of different parameters in the unit, and we can also go back here and increase our LFO strength if that's something we want to do. Here we also have a way to apply different effects on the channel or track that we're using currently. In this case, we actually have a lot to choose from. We have some filters that we can apply. We also have some boost settings right here. We have an isolator, transient, compressor, drive, a crusher, saturation, distortion, frequency shift, ring modulator, a lot of stuff like that. Some of these effects actually came out in an update for the TR-8S just like a month ago or something, so it's really cool to have them here as well. Now remember that these parameters and effects and stuff only applies to the channel that I'm working on currently, so you can actually use 6 of them at the same time. That's kind of powerful. Many of the different effect parameters can also be assigned to the control knob on the unit, so you can use that to modify the effect in real time or sequence it on the step sequencer, similar to what you can do with the pitch and the decay and stuff. And as if that wasn't enough, we also have this main master effect section that applies effects to the main output of the unit. The effects are pretty much the same as we saw on the individual tracks, but in this case it applies to everything. That's a lot of fun to use just for playing around with stuff here at home, or maybe doing a live session with this one. The patterns on the TR-6S are all locked into 16 steps in length. You can make them shorter than that and create these polyrhythmic loops, which is kind of cool, but you can't make any patterns that are longer than 16 steps. If you want to do that, you have to chain patterns together. But for me, at least so far, it's way easier to create different variations of the patterns inside of a single pattern. I guess it sounds more confusing than it actually is. So one pattern is this 16-step sequence, right? But then you can go into different variations and create up to 8 different patterns inside of one pattern and then chain those together. So for this one, I just chained 4 different variations inside of my one pattern. So a pattern can hold up to 8 different variations and be 16 steps long, and then you have 16 times, I don't even know how many banks. Okay, so the maximum seems to be 8 different banks with 16 different patterns per bank and up to 8 different variations per pattern. So that's a lot. I also want to mention that the TR-6S does come with the same FM synth engine that you can find in the later update for the Roland TR-8S. It's all in here despite the size of it. It's actually really cool. I haven't used it too much myself yet, but just to be able to do frequency modulation stuff in a unit of this size, together with all the stuff with the samples and the drums, yeah, that's powerful. So when it all comes down to it though, I'm actually a big fan of the TR-6S. The TR-8S is something that I never picked up myself. I never had it in the studio at all because, you know, it's a bit too big and bulky to not be able to handle anything unquantized at all. But in this form factor, it really doesn't bother me as much. So the TR-6S is definitely going to have its own dedicated spot over here somewhere in the doorless corner of my studio. I think it's going to play nicely together with all the other stuff that I have hooked up over here. You know, just being able to fire off a few loops with some sample-based drums or maybe some one-shots with notes or chords or whatever, I think it's going to be cool. But it doesn't come without its limitations though, that's for a fact. I mean, it's limited to just holding 6 different samples on 6 different tracks. It can't do anything unquantized, and you know, being able to sequence like melodies or chord progressions and stuff is a bit more finicky than perhaps something you would want to use as your main device for all your music making needs. But that's not really the purpose of this one, and that's definitely not how I'm gonna use it in my studio myself. But you know, those types of limitations can sometimes just ignite a new spark of creativity inside of you and make you kind of make music in a different way than you're used to. So I think that's really fun. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say right now about the new Roland TR-6S Rhythm Performer. That's it. Thanks a lot for watching this video. I hope to see you guys in the next one. Until then, ha det gott!
Accurate beats.